When people talk about the English language in Africa, the conversation almost always circles back to familiar references. Some imagine the crisp tone associated with British English, shaped by decades of colonial education. Others picture the relaxed, confident flow of American English, made popular by movies, music, and urban culture. Each of these styles reflects identity, heritage, and history. Yet in recent years, something new has begun quietly weaving itself into the linguistic landscape of Africa. It is not loud. It is not pushed by political agendas or educational institutions. It does not announce itself through government policies or official campaigns. The Philippines, a Southeast Asian archipelago thousands of kilometers from Africa, has somehow become a major force in shaping how young Africans speak English. The change did not happen overnight. It grew slowly, almost invisibly, as more Africans came into contact with Filipino teachers, freelancers, influencers, vloggers, and professionals who use English with a particular style: gentle in tone, neutral in accent, clear in delivery, and warm in emotion. To understand why this influence took root so strongly, one must go back to the digital revolution that connected continents without anyone boarding a plane. As remote work expanded, Africans entered the global online workforce in huge numbers. Many joined virtual teams with Filipino colleagues who had already built strong reputations in customer service, virtual assistance, online teaching, and content creation. It did not feel rigid or overly formal. It did not try to imitate British elegance or American swagger. It simply sounded natural, soft, steady, polite, and universally friendly. For Africans who valued clarity and emotional expression, this style felt surprisingly familiar, almost as if it matched the rhythm of their own cultures. The more Africans interacted with Filipino professionals, the more they began appreciating this distinctive way of speaking. They noticed that Filipino speakers rarely rushed their sentences. They used intonation to sound welcoming. They smiled through their words, making conversations feel lighter and more enjoyable. Their pronunciation was consistent yet flexible, and their tone conveyed respect even during difficult discussions. Soon, African freelancers and young professionals began adopting small elements of Filipino speech without consciously trying. They slowed down their delivery. They softened their consonants. They shaped their sentences using patterns that echoed Filipino phrasing. In cities like Nairobi, Accra, Lagos, and Johannesburg, young Africans started watching Filipino vloggers not only for entertainment, but also to learn how to communicate with global audiences. Tutorials titled "How to Speak Neutral English" or "Tips for Clear English Pronunciation" became popular across African social media. Many of these tutorials were created by Filipinos. English teachers across Africa noticed the trend as well. Some observed that their students had begun shifting their accents unintentionally. Others started incorporating neutral English techniques into their lessons, techniques widely used in the Philippines for call center training and ESL programs. Meanwhile, African creators on TikTok and YouTube embraced Filipino-style expressions. The influence expanded even further when comedians began using Filipino-style English in their skits. Audiences laughed at the familiarity of the tone, the melody of the accent, and the exaggerated politeness that Filipinos are known for. But beneath the humor was admiration. African viewers recognized that Filipino English had a comforting, friendly charm that resonated with their own cultural values. The transformation became more visible in customer service industries across Africa. Workers trained with these methods often received better feedback because the communication style created a calm and respectful atmosphere. This alignment between African and Filipino values is one of the reasons the influence grew organically. Both regions have cultures rooted in warmth, hospitality, and emotional expression. So when Africans encountered Filipino English, they didn't see it as foreign. They saw it as a reflection of something they already understood. Language schools in Ghana and Kenya began offering courses in neutral English communication, a term widely used in the Philippines. The deeper reason behind the widespread appeal is tied to how Filipinos themselves learned English. For more than a century, English in the Philippines developed alongside local languages, absorbing their rhythm, tone, and emotional qualities. The result is a way of speaking that is less mechanical and more human, balanced, melodic, and warm. This blend makes Filipino English one of the most approachable forms of global English today. African learners discovered that this style allowed them to sound international without trying to imitate a culture that wasn't theirs. Filipinos had already proven that you do not need to sound British or American to be respected globally. You only need clarity, politeness, and confidence. This idea resonated deeply across Africa. For generations, African English speakers were judged unfairly based on the strength of their local accents, even when their grammar and vocabulary were excellent. Filipino English offered a middle ground, a style that was globally understood but not tied to Western dominance. It gave Africans permission to speak English in a way that felt authentic, not forced. Students who learned English from Filipino teachers online often developed a natural balance in their speech. Their words carried the confidence of international English blended with the emotional depth of African expression. Teachers, parents, and employers began noticing this shift in tone, a softness combined with clarity. The shift extended into entertainment as well. African comedians and creators used Filipino phrases like, "for me," "I think," or "it's like," in their performances. These expressions, commonly used in Filipino conversation, spread quickly in Africa due to their gentle and relatable tone. Parents hear their children speaking in a soft, clear voice shaped by hours of listening to Filipino vloggers and tutorials. This younger generation is growing up with an accent that is neither Western nor purely local, an accent that carries the melody of Filipino English infused with African spirit. And with every passing year, this blended version of English becomes more deeply embedded in African society. Linguists predict that within the next decade, African English will evolve into a more neutral, friendly, and melodic tone, one that echoes Filipino influence while retaining African identity. And it is just getting started. The evolution of African English through Filipino influence is not only happening among youth or digital workers. Entire communities are gradually absorbing this shift, even if they don't consciously label it as such. The change unfolds in subtle ways, through the tone people use while offering help, the way they form polite requests, the softening of vowels in professional settings, and the gentle cadence that begins to replace previously sharp or fast-paced rhythms. When someone listens closely to conversations happening in African call centers or remote work hubs today, they hear echoes of the Philippines. The deliberate phrasing, the patient pause before answering, the warm intonation that carries not just clarity but empathy. It is a transformation built not on imitation but admiration. Admiration for a culture that mastered the art of global communication without sacrificing kindness or cultural identity. To understand how deeply this shift has woven itself into African speech patterns, consider the experience of remote workers who transitioned from local jobs to global freelance careers. Many recount their first encounters with Filipino teammates or supervisors. They often describe being surprised at the combination of professionalism and softness in Filipino English. The words were simple, but the delivery carried reassurance. Even during moments of confusion or pressure, Filipino colleagues maintained a calm, steady manner of speaking that seemed to dissolve tension. Africans working in tech support, marketing, tutoring, or creative fields began adopting these qualities because they worked. International clients appreciated the clarity. Virtual teams became more cooperative, meetings flowed more smoothly, and the confidence gained from being understood clearly helped African workers perform better, earn more, and build long-term professional relationships. As these workers shared tips and experiences with friends and family, Filipino-inspired communication began spreading throughout their communities. Group chats suddenly included expressions learned from Filipino colleagues. Younger siblings watched Filipino content with their older brothers and sisters. What makes this change particularly powerful is how naturally it blends with African values. Both cultures emphasize respect for elders, politeness in everyday life, and friendliness as a social glue. When these values appear in language, they create speech that feels genuinely sincere. African and Filipino styles of communication meet in this shared emotional space. This connection becomes even more apparent when looking at the entertainment world. African creators on YouTube and TikTok frequently incorporate Filipino speech styles into their storytelling. They mimic the gentle transitions Filipinos often use, phrases that soften a point or show humility. These expressions resonate because African storytelling traditionally values courtesy and consideration. One can see this influence in comedic sketches where creators imitate Filipino classroom teachers, customer service agents, or vloggers. Instead, viewers see appreciation wrapped in laughter. Filipinos are portrayed as patient, friendly, and encouraging, traits Africans also admire in their own cultures. Teachers across Africa have also observed changes in how their students approach English. They note that Filipino English videos on YouTube and TikTok have become common learning tools. They adopt the slow, steady pacing, repeating sounds until they feel confident. In some classrooms, it isn't unusual to hear students using Filipino-style phrases during English practice sessions. Parents sometimes express surprise when they hear their children speaking with a neutral tone that resembles Filipino English more than local accents. They see it as an advantage in a globalized world where English is essential for success in higher education and international opportunities. Meanwhile, African professionals who once feared being judged for their accents now find comfort in this new linguistic space. Filipino English proves that English does not have to belong to one dominant culture. It can be flexible, adaptable, and infused with warmth. Africans embrace this lesson deeply. They only need a clear, effective, and confident way to speak. Employees trained to welcome guests from around the world often use communication models inspired by Filipino hospitality. The Philippines is famous for its service with a smile culture, and this philosophy translates into speech patterns that sound friendly and helpful. African tourism workers learn to greet guests warmly, provide clear instructions, and use tones that convey eagerness to assist. Trainees are encouraged to observe how these instructors maintain politeness in every sentence, from giving directions to resolving complaints. Through repetition and practice, African workers begin to mirror these techniques, elevating their communication skills. In corporate environments, managers praise employees who use Filipino-inspired styles. Workplace conflicts are easier to resolve when voices are calm and empathetic. Supervisors note that employees who speak in this manner often build stronger relationships with international clients. These benefits make Filipino English attractive even for Africans who may never interact directly with Filipinos. They learn the style because it helps them succeed in global fields. Filipino English is becoming a bridge that connects cultures, not through force but through practicality. Language schools across Africa now offer courses on soft accent English. Many of the techniques are derived from Philippine ESL methods, slow mouth movements, controlled breathing, rounded vowels, and subtle consonants. Students who complete these programs often find it easier to communicate internationally. They report feeling more confident in job interviews, customer service roles, and online interactions. For them, Filipino-inspired English is not just a communication tool. It is a pathway to greater opportunities. But beyond the practical benefits, something deeper is happening. They can create their own hybrid of English, one that blends Filipino warmth with African expressiveness. As more Africans adopt aspects of Filipino English, the continent develops its own signature voice, clear, melodic, welcoming, and emotionally rich. This emerging style may soon be recognized globally as a distinct African-neutral English influenced by Filipino patterns. And because it carries the qualities of both cultures, it creates a unique connection between regions that rarely interacted historically. Linguists around the world have begun studying this phenomenon. They observe how Filipino English acts as a linguistic equalizer across the global South. It does not place one group above another. It unites people through shared clarity and kindness. This is why it spreads so easily in Africa, a region that values community, togetherness, and respect. Many young Africans describe discovering Filipino English as a moment of liberation. They say it helped them break away from the pressure to sound Western. They no longer feel the need to imitate accents that do not match their spirit. Instead, they embrace a style that allows them to sound global while remaining true to themselves. African vloggers and public speakers who adopt Filipino tones often gain larger audiences. Their voices feel accessible. Their messages come across clearly. Their delivery feels sincere and inviting. Viewers who might have struggled to understand strong local accents now follow creators with ease because Filipino-inspired English bridges comprehension gaps. In online teaching communities, African tutors have adopted this style to connect with students from around the world. Many say that adjusting their tone to be more like Filipino instructors help them retain students and earn higher reviews. Their lessons feel smoother and more engaging. Their students feel more comfortable asking questions. And the tutors themselves feel proud to speak English in a way that blends the best of African and Filipino warmth. Even African musicians and spoken word poets experiment with Filipino intonation during performances that incorporate English. They use the melodic rise and fall associated with Filipino speech to enhance their delivery. Audiences respond enthusiastically because the rhythm feels soothing and expressive at the same time. What began as an accidental influence is now a full cultural exchange. Africa listens to Filipino voices daily through YouTube, TikTok, virtual classes, and remote work meetings. These voices shape how Africans teach, learn, perform, and express themselves. And as African voices echo these patterns, they create a fusion that enriches both regions. The shift also reflects a larger global trend. English is no longer defined by Western nations. The global South is shaping the future of the language. Africa and the Philippines stand at the forefront of this change, not through political power, but through authenticity and connection. And with this movement growing every year, the future of English may reflect the voices of those who speak with empathy rather than authority. Voices that communicate with clarity rather than competition. Voices that value connection above perfection. As the Filipino English wave continues spreading across African communities, something remarkable becomes clear. This trend is not just about pronunciation or vocabulary. African societies have long celebrated communication that reflects warmth, humility, and human connection. And because Filipino English carries these same values, it resonates deeply. One of the most interesting things about this evolution is how naturally it blends with the linguistic diversity of Africa. The continent has thousands of languages, each with its own rhythm, musicality, and expressive patterns. Many African languages use tonal shifts, variations in pitch, and vibrant emotional cues. Filipino English, with its melodic inflections and soft emotional undertones, complements these natural communication styles rather than competing with them. This harmony becomes clear in multilingual families where parents and children speak several languages daily. English enters their conversations not as a cold, formal entity, but as a warm, adaptable medium shaped by Filipino influence. A parent might switch from a local language to English with a softened tone. A child might adopt Filipino-style pauses while explaining something. The transformation also reaches schools where English is taught as a second or third language. Teachers observe that students are more willing to speak in class when the English they hear is friendly and non-intimidating. Filipino YouTube tutors have played a major role in this. Their videos show that English does not need to be stiff or perfect. It can be expressive, forgiving, and conversational. African students watching these lessons feel more at ease with the language. In turn, their confidence grows. They participate more actively. They lose the fear of sounding wrong, which has discouraged many learners for years. Virtual tutors who instruct students from Asia, Europe, and the Middle East notice that adopting Filipino-style clarity improves their ratings and student retention. Their students respond positively, describing the lessons as easy to follow and emotionally comforting. Some African tutors even say they began their careers by learning from Filipino ESL teachers. They copied their teaching methods, their presentation style, and their strategies for building rapport. And now, African tutors are spreading this same energy to students across the globe, creating a chain of influence that connects continents through education. The impact of Filipino English on African social media is equally impressive. Influencers who use softer tones and clearer articulation report higher engagement. Their audiences feel drawn to their calm delivery, which contrasts with the fast, sharp speech styles often associated with Western content. The Filipino-inspired tone feels inclusive, accessible, and friendly, qualities that align perfectly with African digital culture. Creators who focus on motivational content, storytelling, lifestyle topics, or educational material particularly benefit from this shift. Their videos gain more watch time. Their comment sections fill with viewers praising not only the content, but the soothing way it is delivered. Many Africans subscribe to Filipino channels because they see themselves reflected in the warmth, humor, and humility of the presenters. They feel connected despite cultural distances. They recognize similar values in how Filipinos treat their families, celebrate their traditions, and express their emotions. This connection grows stronger as African creators begin collaborating with Filipino ones. Joint live streams, reaction videos, and educational collabs become increasingly common. These interactions reveal how comfortably Africans and Filipinos communicate with each other, often without needing adjustments. Their shared communication style bridges any cultural gap naturally. At the same time, African comedians continue embracing Filipino expressions in their skits. They exaggerate Filipino politeness or mimic the rising intonation used for certain questions. The humor works because audiences are already familiar with these patterns. They have seen Filipino content for years, either through remote work, online tutorials, or viral videos. So when comedians imitate Filipino English, Africans recognize the tone instantly. It reflects admiration and a sense of shared experience. People laugh because Filipino English feels familiar, almost like an accent they hear in their own communities now. In workplaces across Africa, the influence becomes increasingly institutional. Companies seeking to improve communication standards begin modeling their customer service guidelines after Philippine outsourcing firms. Managers download training materials based on Filipino business English. Corporate trainers instruct employees to use soft tones, polite phrasing, and clear articulation, skills that originated in the world-renowned Philippine BPO industry. Employees quickly notice positive feedback from clients. Conversations become smoother, misunderstandings decrease. Customers express appreciation for the calm, friendly tone of African representatives. And because Filipino English emphasizes patience and rapport building, African workers naturally excel with these techniques. The tourism industry benefits significantly from this. African tour guides, hotel staff, and travel agents adopt Filipino-inspired styles to communicate with international guests. Their voices sound not only clear but welcoming. Their intonation signals hospitality. Guests feel comfortable and valued, which enhances their overall experience. This uplifting tone reflects a core similarity between African and Filipino cultures, the deep importance of hospitality. Both societies place great emphasis on making visitors feel at home. Both are known for friendliness, warmth, and genuine interest in others. When these cultural values merge through language, the result is communication that feels effortlessly sincere. In some African universities, linguistics departments begin noticing this shift in speech patterns among students. Professors discuss how Filipino English is shaping a new neutral African English, one that differs from the British English taught decades ago. This new accent is softer, more melodic, and more expressive. Researchers predict that this influence will continue shaping African speech for generations. Even African media producers notice that Filipino English makes content more marketable internationally. This creates a new standard of professional English across the continent, one that blends African emotion with Filipino clarity. In radio broadcasting, some presenters refine their delivery by balancing their natural accents with Filipino-inspired smoothness. Listeners describe this as relaxing and engaging. They find it easier to follow programs without straining to understand thick accents or rapid delivery. This further reinforces the appeal of Filipino-influenced speech. The influence also reaches African diaspora communities abroad. Families living in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia often rely on Filipino caregivers, teachers, and co-workers. African children raised abroad sometimes pick up Filipino speech habits from their caregivers or teachers. When they return to Africa, they bring these linguistic traits with them, spreading the influence even further. Interestingly, the connection works both ways. Many Filipinos living abroad interact with Africans in workplaces, schools, and communities. They share stories, humor, and cultural expressions that strengthen the bond between the two groups. Their communication styles complement each other, leading to friendships that transcend geography. The deeper significance of this transformation becomes clearer when looking at global language trends. For centuries, English has been shaped primarily by Western powers. British and American English have dominated textbooks, examinations, and academic standards. But in the digital age, influence no longer depends on geography or politics. It flows through screens, workplaces, and communities. The Filipino English-influenced African speaker represents a new era of linguistic evolution, one that is democratic, decentralized, and rooted in shared humanity. Instead of copying colonial accents, Africans now adopt a style that aligns with their values and needs. They choose clarity without rigidity, professionalism without coldness, and expressiveness without confusion. This shift empowers millions of Africans who once felt anxious about speaking English. They now realize that the goal is not to sound Western, but to communicate authentically and effectively. This realization transforms classrooms, workplaces, and social interactions across the continent. Young Africans in particular find freedom in this approach. They no longer view English as a tool of judgment. They view it as a bridge. They mix local expressions with Filipino-inspired tones to create a voice that is uniquely theirs. In many ways, Filipino English has become a symbol of global belonging. It shows that you don't need wealth, political power, or centuries of influence to shape the world. Ordinary people, teachers, freelancers, vloggers, call center agents, can transform global communication simply by being themselves consistently, authentically, and kindly. The rise of Filipino English in Africa proves something profound. The Global South has the power to define international standards. It proves that kindness and clarity can be more influential than prestige, and that voices from developing nations can change how the world speaks. As African communities adopt this style, they contribute to a new global English shaped by real people and digital connections, not colonial textbooks. This emerging voice carries the softness of Filipino melodies and the strength of African identity. It shapes conversations, careers, and opportunities, breaking barriers and building bridges. In countless African cities, its echoes can be heard everywhere. The transformation is especially noticeable in the younger generation, who see English as a living, flexible means of expression. At the university level, it's discussed as a case study of modern language evolution, proving that influence is no longer monopolized by former colonial powers. The economic impact is significant, too. With every new voice, the connection between Africa and the Philippines grows deeper. As the years pass, the influence of Filipino English continues to deepen its roots across the African continent, shaping not only how people speak, but also how they perceive language itself. What began as a subtle shift sparked by online interactions has evolved into a defining feature of modern African communication, an example of how cultures can learn from one another without losing their identity. The transformation becomes especially noticeable when listening to the younger generation. While older generations often view English as a formal tool for academic or business purposes, young Africans see it as a living, flexible means of expression. They switch effortlessly between local languages, street slang, and Filipino-influenced English, depending on the situation. Their English carries a softness, a clarity, and a melodic flow that reflects hours spent watching Filipino content online. Their tone feels controlled yet expressive, warm yet confident. It fits the rhythm of their thoughts and emotions. This shift also reshapes how English is taught and evaluated across Africa. Teachers develop new methods inspired by Filipino ESL techniques, slowing down speech, emphasizing vowel clarity, using gentle repetition, and incorporating emotion into lessons. Students find these methods more inviting than the strict, rule-heavy approaches of the past. English becomes less intimidating. It becomes something they can master without sacrificing their natural way of speaking. And with newfound confidence, more African students participate in global competitions, online exchanges, and international programs where communication skills matter immensely. They analyze how a non-Western accent gained global influence through digital media, remote work, and soft-skill industries. Students are fascinated by the fact that an accent once dismissed by some Westerners is now shaping speech patterns across continents. This triggers important conversations about cultural power. African students reflect on how English has always been presented as something belonging to the West. Yet here they are, embracing an English style shaped by another part of the global South, proving that influence is no longer monopolized by former colonial powers. The economic impact is significant as well. African freelancers who adopt Filipino-style communication often secure more contracts and maintain longer client relationships. This success inspires more Africans to explore virtual careers, fueling economic growth across regions. Call centers in Kenya, South Africa, Ghana, and Rwanda observe noticeable improvements after integrating Filipino communication modules. Employees report feeling more confident, less stressed, and better equipped to handle demanding customers. Managers note that the workplace atmosphere becomes more supportive when workers use gentle tones and respectful phrasing. In Nigeria, companies offering virtual assistants training begin modeling their curriculum after Philippine BPO standards. Trainees learn how to manage calls, write emails, and speak to clients with the calm authority typical of Filipino professionals. This preparation helps thousands secure jobs in the global market. For many African families, the influence carries emotional significance. Parents watch their children speak English more clearly and confidently than previous generations. They see them communicate with teachers abroad, join online classes, or collaborate with peers from other countries. They take pride in their children's ability to navigate international spaces with ease. Children politely say, "Excuse me," "please," or "thank you," with Filipino-style softness. They copy the intonation patterns they hear in online tutorials. Parents find these habits charming and appreciate the respect embedded in each phrase. Meanwhile, Africans living abroad experience the influence in reverse. In regions where Filipinos form large communities, such as the Middle East, parts of Asia, or the Americas, African families often interact with Filipino coworkers, neighbors, or service workers. Their children sometimes learn English from Filipino teachers or caregivers. When these families return to Africa, the Filipino influence spreads even further. Another layer of cultural exchange emerges through friendships formed in digital spaces. Filipino and African gamers, creators, and students interact regularly on platforms like Discord, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. They learn from each other, exchange slang, and laugh at similar styles of humor. Because Filipino English already resonates with African emotional expression, conversations between Filipinos and Africans feel natural and flowing. Misunderstandings are rare, laughter is frequent, bonds are strong. This shared linguistic space also reveals something deeper. Both groups understand what it means to navigate global spaces from the margins of Western influence. Both know the feeling of being underestimated. Both recognize the power of using English as a tool rather than a measure of worth. They see the Philippines as a model of a country that harnessed English not to mimic the West, but to connect with the world on its own terms. Africans look at this example with admiration. They see possibilities for themselves. They see a path that does not require abandoning their roots or reshaping their identity to please Western expectations. This realization empowers them like never before. It also challenges outdated perceptions about what good English sounds like. The belief that English must sound British or American fades with each passing year. African youth no longer chase accents. They chase effectiveness. They chase clarity. They chase authenticity, and Filipino English embodies all of these qualities. The evolution of African English is therefore not a story of imitation but transformation. They create something entirely new, an English that is distinctly African yet globally understandable. This hybrid voice carries the melodic tones of Filipino speech but maintains the powerful storytelling essence of Africa. It combines Filipino politeness with African rhythm. It blends Filipino calmness with African vibrancy. It is a voice that represents both continents beautifully. In many ways, this linguistic movement reflects a broader shift happening worldwide. Cultures once considered peripheral are now shaping global norms. Influence flows in all directions, no longer dictated by traditional power structures. The Global South stands at the forefront of this shift, rewriting narratives about identity, capability, and connection. The rise of Filipino-style English in Africa is proof of this. No government-imposed IT.no institution enforced it. It spread because people recognized its value, because it brought comfort instead of pressure, because it aligned with their cultural spirit, because it helped them succeed, and most importantly, because it showed them that English does not belong to a specific race, nation, or class. English belongs to whoever uses it with sincerity. Today, when a young African speaks with a soft, clear Filipino-inspired tone, they represent a new generation redefining the global voice. They demonstrate that language can evolve through kindness. They prove that influence can come from collaboration, not domination. They show that connection matters more than imitation. It belongs to the world, to Africans, to Filipinos, to anyone who speaks with clarity, confidence, and kindness. And this new global voice, shaped by the hearts of the global South, is just beginning to rise.